Back in 2016 I went to Sri Lanka. I had two objectives. One, to meet long-lost relatives and make a film, which you can see on this channel. And secondly, to make an advertisement for an eco-camp in the jungle. First week was spent mainly in the hills researching my family history. I could see quite a lot of jungle from up there too. We passed the glorious Devon Falls, which I had just enough light to photograph. By the 13th of August, I had been in Sri Lanka for 5 days, and I was staying at my cousin's bungalow near Bandaroela. After a hearty lunch of fish curry followed by passion fruit trifle, I needed a walk, so I headed down the valley and into the woods. I saw some pretty cows there. A boy gave me a fruit he called a pear, but it wasn't very appetizing, so I discarded it when I was out of his sight. I also found a beautiful red flower on the ground, which I placed in a bubbling brook as an offering to an unknown god. On my walk back up the hill, I was very excited to encounter an enormous rat snake.
Ooh, big bastard.
It stood up on end, rearing its head to look at me, then retreated to the bank on the left, where it attempted to heave its large body upwards. I managed to get a shot of him on my camera phone as he departed in a shower of tumbling rocks and mud. A tuk-tuk driver heralded his exit with a passing cry of, "Look, it's a snake!" Back at the bungalow, Kenneth and I watched birds from the summer house. We saw myna birds, parakeets, wild jungle fowl, a crow pheasant, and others I can't remember. Best of all, a herd of barking deer came to drink in the garden, and after many failed attempts, I got a decent shot or two, particularly of the horned buck. On the 15th of August, it was an auspicious day. 129 years exactly since the day my great-grandfather, Veer Rausel, was born here in Sri Lanka. I left Kenneth in the hills and headed down to the scrubby, dry jungle around Yala National Park. Now I am to create an advertisement for a jungle safari camp and must get good footage of animals. It isn't actually in a jungle, it's just dry scrub, only 20-year-old growth. But there are old forests on the hills nearby where the elephants take shelter during the hottest part of the day. The place is like a dream, wonderful accommodation. I have a very big tent, binoculars, mosquito repellent, and everything I need. The owner is a Dane, a decent sort of chap. After lunch we went for a walk, during which I had a nice beer. On this walk I really struggled to photograph all the different birds we saw. The hornbills were so graceful. I had already seen garden lizards and geckos at the lodge, but now there were eagles, egrets, woodpeckers galore, but my camera work wasn't up to it. Finally we encountered some elephants, and I got great footage. There was even a tusker. As we walked back to the lodge, the pachyderms shadowed us on the other side of the electric fence that borders the protected area for the animals. The blighters even tried to pull down the fence as we cowered in the scrub. "Mr. Hammond, after great consideration, I have decided not to endorse your park." We got back to the lodge and so did the elephants, but as the light faded, they eventually slunk away and we calmed down with some gin and tonics. Happy birthday to my dear ancestor. I am writing now from my tent, which feels very military, colonial, safari. I left a leafy twig on a branch of the tree by my tent, as I read in the book by John Still that this is how the local Tamils used to honour the god of the jungle, Aiyanar. Thank the gods and my forebears for my blessings. 16th August. I was up at 5:30 in the morning and given strong coffee before setting out to observe the birds. The dawn chorus was rapturous, and a great diversity of species congregated in a large tree near our camp. After breakfast, we headed out into the jungle for a walk. It was 37 degrees in the sun, but much cooler in the woods near the hill. In the jungle I felt a calm feeling of enlargement, as though my lungs were growing and my mind clearing. We saw no animals, just a sambur skull, but we did stumble upon the sleeping elephants, although I could neither see nor smell them, but the trackers could. We were actually in severe danger, because the elephants are prone to attack people who enter the jungle in the daytime. The elephants would pay us back for this disturbance later on. The woods were alive with a feeling of God. which is greater than the mere sight of a beast. We returned for lunch and I got some standard promo shots. After Sunne faded behind the hill to the west, the atmosphere became beautiful and calm. A breeze which was both warm and cooling at the same time blew in from the south, and the air was filled with the sweetness of the little wildflowers and herbs. In this perfect temperature and tranquil light, we returned to the lake where we had seen the elephants yesterday. We all waited in silence for a long time, but only a heron and lapwings appeared. The quiet time was good for my soul, and I said a prayer of thanks inwardly. Quietly we trod the path back to the lodge and prepared for supper as the sun went down. I drank the last beer. There was a national shortage due to a flood at the brewery. In the dark I saw 3 species of bat. After supper, everyone started going to bed. But suddenly, a lad said that a bull elephant was outside. I put down my glass of wine and picked up my binoculars and peered into the pale moonlight to see the silver silhouette of an elephant's back, and beneath it, glowing eerily, were 2 long white tusks. We gazed at the beast for what seemed like ages before finally we decided to go to bed, a bit overexcited. But just as I was about to retire, the tusker returned, closer than before, gradually making his way from the south to the eastern perimeter of the lodge behind the kitchen where the water tanks were. He was tearing up trees and foliage on his way. Binoculars were no longer necessary. From the rear of the hut, we could view the majestic brute from just 10 feet away, his markings clear in the bright light of Mani. Then, the distant trumpeting, which we had heard when the tusker first arrived, was revealed as a herald to their later arrival, for we were now surrounded. 2 tuskers, a juvenile and a mother with a calf, no larger than a pig, all softly treading about a camp demarcated only by candles. I can scarcely describe the atmosphere, which had transcended mere exhilaration and latent fear of danger, and was now of awe, as though we had been visited by great spirits of the forest. The beasts were testing the hospitality of man, digging up the growth at the very edge of the lodge. The first tusker was particularly cheeky, lifting and toying with the water pipes until the owner made a soft growling noise to warn him off. This confrontation merely caused the great creature to retreat a couple of paces before returning. For hours this continued, until it became an ordeal, for my eyes were heavy and I could scarcely keep them open as I strained to see into the darkness. However, I was able after a while to see even into the shadows cast by trees beneath the moon's strange light. The conditions were in fact perfect. Again I decided to go to bed, and just as I was starting towards my tent, the tusker broke through the invisible barrier symbolized by the candles. He hurried nervously, like a scorned puppy, from the kitchen area, across the lit path and into the scrub to the west, where he resumed grazing. He stood right next to where we had been sat drinking, his glowing tusks shining in the night. I was torn between this incredible sight and my strong desire to go to sleep. It was only midnight, but my eyes were sore after 19 hours without rest. One of the trackers led me stealthily round the back of the tents to the east, and I was given a torch to ward off any elephants who might get too familiar. Finally in bed, my body covered in sweat, I left one half of the door open to keep an eye on the elephants, and one side window to the north for the same reason. The entire troop surrounded my tent, and through each opening the great ones grazed brazenly, as close as possible to me. I was resting my eyes to the sound of about 15 enormous beasts tearing trees down on every side of me. Strangely, I slept soundly until 8:30 a.m. After lunch the next day, I headed out for my first safari. I saw a jackal on the route, as well as a rather tragic bull elephant that had learned to beg by the side of the road for food. So different to the noble ones of the night before. In the park, the tracker helped us spot animals. A crocodile, some spotted deer, monkeys, a mongoose, peacocks, but no leopards. There was a conspicuous white SUV containing the former president's son, whose passion for photographing leopards brought him frequently to Yala National Park. Obviously wealthy, he had a very long lens on his expensive camera. Probably a wanker. We got out of the jeep to have some lunch. I left my camera on the tripod and the wind blew it over, breaking the lens. I was furious. I was surprised how affected I was. I must develop a meditative technique to combat this in pressing situations. We saw a jeep parked on the main road past a reservoir and heard the telltale alarm call of monkeys that signals the presence of a predator. The guide jabbered excitedly in hushed voice, pointing out a leopard.
Two of them.
I managed to spin my camera around and zoom straight in on the beast, getting the image semi-in focus enough to realize there were actually 3 cats. They slunk off into the bush, but the adrenaline remained. It was all a blur after that. My emotion from the broken lens, the excitement of the leopards, and relief that I had got a shot of them combined into an overwhelming sensation. To be honest, my first sight of an apex predatory mammal was underwhelming, for I had viewed it entirely through my camera's little LCD screen. I felt strange and a little cheated. Then I felt guilty of my ignoble and ungrateful attitude, but I couldn't shake it. Finally, my mind, activated by the enormous power of the August full moon that beamed down upon the road and the jungle, turned to absurd hypotheticals and delusions. My heart soared from great elation, even euphoria, to crushing self-loathing, as I sat in the jeep burning inside. We arranged to return at dawn. Although it was only 7 o'clock, I was utterly exhausted from the heat of the day and the mental drain of the full moon. 18th of August. I was up so early. 4:30, and soon I was in the jeep, tearing through the darkness. The full moon was still up, and there was a haunting electric atmosphere. This was enhanced when the jeep suddenly stopped, as the driver spotted a sloth bear. It loped along through the scrub, skirting the road to our left. We followed it as it continued, steadfast in its unknown business, hurrying along like a fat man late for work. At one point we got it in the headlights and could see its markings, light patches near the front, otherwise black. It was fully visible in the moonlight though, a silver silhouette along its hairy back. From afar it looked more like a huge badger than an American grizzly. I'm glad it was too dark for photos, which would have spoiled the magic of the moment. We were the first jeep in the park, but not for long. The rich boy was there again, and soon many others. There were many more spotted deer in the park at sunrise, and in the distance I saw what looked like a wild boar crossing the road. Everyone was up early for leopards, but we couldn't find any, so we stopped at the place I had broken my lens the day before and had a cup of tea and some biscuits. We drove about a bit, then returned to where I'd seen the leopards yesterday. Lo and behold, there was a leopard. Further away than the others, but relaxed and in full view, so I could get plenty of shots.
Don't move the car, please, because it shakes.
He heard a deer move in the woods and was up like a shot and gone like a ghost. We waited and a different leopard, a female, appeared and licked her paws at the edge of the bushes.
Oh yeah, I see it.
Then the male returned, presumably her mate, and lay down again in the open to be photographed. I assume he killed the prey and hid it in a tree for later because he had no blood on his maw. He rolled about on a warm rock, occasionally glancing at us nonchalantly from a distance of about 70 meters. Finally he left, and I was confident I had good footage. We stopped off to get shots of crocodiles and the landscape before heading home for breakfast. It wasn't even 9:30 when we got back, but it felt very late in the day. The heat was gathering in the air again, and the sweat on my brow. In the evening we all walked to the lake to watch the elephants. A large bull was bathing. The tusker from before was there, nudging a female and preparing to mount. But the big bull grabbed his boner with his trunk. Weird. Beautiful scene in general, and I got some nice shots. That night I had 2 gin and tonics while watching the bats, and after supper the tusker visited camp again, and we all watched in awe. The next day, I made my way back to the airport. This is the 3rd video in a series called Jungle Diaries. The 4th video, coming up, will be about my trip to Indonesia. Make sure to subscribe and to click the bell to get notifications. Check out some of my other content, and sign up to be a patron on Patreon or Subscribestar to get access to my exclusive content. Thanks.